So in today's video, we're taking a look at the LG C2 against the new LG C3, and we're looking at whether this is going to be worth your purchase this year. And while the C2 is still available, is it just worth picking that one up? Now, we paid full retail value for both of these TVs. We'll be looking at brightness and also the design, and we'll be looking at the key differences in both of them. Let's get started. Don't forget to hit the red button to subscribe and give this video a thumbs up and click the notification bell to get my next video first. So as not to confuse you, the LG C2 will always be on the left of your screen and the LG C3 will always be on the right. Okay, so on first look, it appears that both TVs are identical, but there is a difference. On the stand of the C3, they've added a metal bit to the base. Now, I think that this is to give it stability. As you can see, on the left is the C2, on the right is the C3. So it does feel a little bit more robust, and it does add about 300 grams of weight. But other than that, they are pretty much identical. As you can see, it's the same back as last year. And this is where you have the Visa mount and you have the big, almost like sticking out part, and all of the connections are on the right hand side. The stand is the same, the height is pretty much the same. There is a couple of mil difference in the height, but other than that, they are pretty much identical. Now, in terms of the connections, again, they appear to be exactly the same. As you scroll up, they've got 4 HDMI 2.1 at 4K 120 Hz, and you've got your USBs at the top. The cable management is the same on both TVs with that minimal little grip, which does actually work pretty well. Now, in terms of the bezels, there is a very slight difference on the C3. It is slightly smaller than the C1. And in terms of reflection handling, I think that the C3 is just marginally better. I don't know whether that's just me looking at it and seeing it being better, or whether it is actually a difference. But as you can see, I'm going to raise the blind in a second. And on the right-hand side, you've got the C3. And I just think it's a shade darker than the C2 on the left. Now with the C3, we've got the updated processor, and it does definitely start a lot quicker, and the operation of all of the functions is noticeably quicker than the C2 from the previous year. And we've got the updated OS. The operating system is far more reduced. As I scroll down on the left, you can see the C2, where it just seems to go on forever with suggested content, whereas on the C3, there is very minimal things. And there's actually things which I really like the cards over just under the main parts there. There's cards which are your most used option. So for the video tests, I've done it like you would. I've installed the latest software and I've also just set it to exactly the same picture settings. So they should be pretty much identical. And I think in these first tests, they do look almost exactly the same. What I did notice, the theme of going through this video, is that it seems to handle brightness slightly better on the C3. There are some added features with that new processor, where you get AI Super Upscaling Pro, which upscales sub 4K sources while reducing noise and preserving intentional film grain, and also OLED Dynamic Tone Mapping Pro, and this breaks the image down into more zones. And there's also Object Enhancer, and this will sharpen things in the foreground. Now that, I think, could be the biggest difference between these TVs, and it's probably the most noticeable, and it's certainly very noticeable in this next demonstration just after we talk about sound. Some people have said the sound on the C2 is better than the C3. I'm not sure.
X03. It comes with a carry handle, which I don't recommend you use, and also a Type-C USB charging port, as well as dual instructions. But the star of the show, without a doubt, is the speaker. It looks absolutely fantastic. The build quality is insane, and most importantly, the sound is amazing.
So I played different things: music, standard TV like videos and normal TV satellite, and I also played HDR movies, and I really couldn't see that much difference at all in these TVs. So that contrast enhancer, I think, kicks in this type of scene. As I play this through, you'll notice that the C3 on the right is definitely far sharper than the C3 on the left. It's really noticeable. It almost actually appears like you're playing it in two different resolutions, the left being 1080 and the right being 4K. But this was quite interesting. The colour of the sofa on the right is definitely brighter, but if you look underneath the table on the centre, it's losing a lot more detail on the C3 than it was on the C2. I'm not quite sure why that was. When I ran my color test, well, that was pretty much identical. There weren't really any differences. In some scenes, the yellow, for instance, is maybe slightly lighter, but it was very, very minimum. There isn't really any difference at all. Now, playing SDR content is where I did notice a big difference. The C3 was definitely a lot lighter, but in some scenes I preferred the C3 and in others I preferred the C2. In this advert, for instance, I definitely preferred the C2 on the left because the C3 just seemed to be slightly wrong, whereas here I definitely prefer the tones and the colors on the C3. It just seems to be more natural and probably what was intended. The new quick menu on the C3 this year is far better than the C2. You get this almost like a mini menu system, whereas on the C2 you've still got to go to the options and then slide across and do it either with the joystick or with the controller. So that's definitely a bonus. But guys, I do have to say that the differences in HDR content are very, very minimal. In some scenes you do see it, but pretty much in the majority there isn't that much difference. What I would say is that the C3 definitely handles detail a little bit better. The contrast and the balance between light and dark and the shadows do seem to be a bit better on the C3, but it is so minimal it's probably not worth spending the extra money on. In this scene, for instance, you can see that the C3 is definitely better. You've just got better tones and better contrast and better handling of those light and dark areas. And if I zoom in on this shot here, you can get an idea of the extra detail. Now we're running exactly the same footage, exactly the same content in the same source, so there shouldn't really be any difference. But the C2 compared to the C3 in this scene just seems almost like a little bit fuzzy, a little bit blurry, and this has far more detail. So you probably could adjust the sharpness on the C2, but I've taken it right back to the same level so that we can see exactly how the TVs are handling identical content. And again, in this scene, there's very little difference, maybe slightly sharper on the C3. I'm not sure whether you agree with me, but this is really fine lines. The C2 isn't obviously going to be around for very much longer, and so you really need to be quite quick in making your decision whether you go for the C2 now or hold off and get the C3. Now, it may well be that the C3 gets further updates in the future and it starts to get better. And bear in mind that this C3 has only been running for probably about 20 to 30 hours, so it's not really what I would say is run in yet. So it may get better in the future, and I'll keep you posted on that. But this is the shot which I think says it all. It's slightly lighter, there's a little bit more detail, but it's not massive. So if you are buying the C3, then you are going to get the latest TV with the best software and the updated processor, which does come with some added perks like the extra detail. However, if you are going to go for the C2, then you're going to save a lot of cash, and cash is king, and so therefore that's what I would probably choose. I'd probably stick with the C2 and maybe skip the C3 and wait to see what happens with it, or just go straight to the C4 next year. That's my thoughts on this video, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you on the next.